Welcome back into the Daily Dose. I'm your host, Jeff Hansen. As always, the show is brought to you by Give'emHellBrigham.com and by CougarSportsInsider.com, part of the 24/7 Sports Network. Let's get real for a minute. I want to get personal with you guys for a second. When I started this channel, I don't know, 6 weeks ago, 7 weeks ago, I thought maybe we'd get 1,000, maybe 1,500 subscribers by the time football season started, and then we could grow organically once there was on-field news and games and things like that to talk about. We've blown past those expectations, and that's because of the support that you guys have given me. So I want to thank you personally for everything that you've done so far. Every time you like a video or you comment on a video, it helps us spread our reach. Obviously, when there's a new subscriber, it helps us grow that subscriber count. All of these things have helped this platform grow to what it is so far, and it will help us continue to grow in the future. So thank you so much for everything so far. Thank you in advance for your support in the future. And if you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to the channel. It really does mean the world to me. Thank you for your support. Today, let's talk about recruiting. Why are we going to talk about recruiting again? Because it's June and that's what's going on. I mean, that's really what there is to talk about. And I get that recruiting's difficult for some people to cover, to pay attention to. It's hard to follow what's going on with high school kids, especially with BYU when there's missionaries. And even if you sign a highly touted dude, you're not going to see him on the field for 3 years. I get that it's difficult to follow recruiting, but recruiting can be one of the most fun things to pay attention to if you're paying attention to the right places and if it's covered correctly. I think that the lack of interest in recruiting is an indictment on me and my peers for the way that we've covered recruiting. My goal is to make recruiting more fun, to bring more insight, and try to peel back that curtain a little bit so that we can pay a little bit more attention to and make recruiting a little bit more engaging. So that's what we're going to do. That's what we're talking about today. We're talking about recruiting, and it starts with 4-star tight end Ryner Swanson. At this point, you already know. He committed to BYU, went on official visits to Oregon and Texas, had a top 5 of Texas A&M and Utah in addition to Oregon, Texas, and BYU. Ultimately, he signed with BYU. He also had offers from like Florida, Ole Miss, most of the Pac-12 conference. The dude's a big get for BYU. There's no question about it. From a recruiting standpoint, he could have gone just about anywhere. He's coming to Provo. That's back-to-back recruiting classes that Steve Clark has recruited a tight end who could have gone just about anywhere and managed to sign them and bring them into Provo. That's a big deal. There's no question about it. On the field, what does Swanson bring? He will play at BYU for a year before he goes on a mission. So in 2024, he's going to be sharing a field with Jackson Bowers. That really is a throwback, Dan Coates, Johnny Harline type tandem, an Andrew George, Dennis Pitta type tandem. That's what BYU will have in Bowers and Swanson. Swanson is the Harline, right? Swanson is the Pitta. He's got excellent catch radius. He moves really, really well for his size. He's got a knack for getting open. He's a matchup nightmare. You can't put a defensive back on him. He's just too big and too physical, but he's quick enough that he could create space against most linebackers as well. He's difficult to handle in the passing game. He's a willing blocker, and he can do that as well, but he's a mess for defenses in the pass game. He's going to be really difficult. Bowers, on the other hand, he told me that his favorite thing about football is knocking a dude on his butt, laughing at him as he's helping him up and telling him that he's going to do it again on the next play. It's a little bit creepy, but that's the way that he is wired. Jackson Bowers is a football guy. And yeah, he has a knack for high pointing the football, and he can go out and make catches in traffic too, but he's going to make his money blocking and being an extension of the offensive line and a force in the run game. Jackson Bowers, Ryner Swanson together is a really, really interesting combo and a dangerous 1-2 tight end punch. But off the field, Swanson brings a lot to BYU as well. He's very close friends with Weston Port. Weston Port could be a 5-star linebacker by the time all is said and done in the class of 2025. Most of the time, the idea of somebody going to a school to play with their friends or a package deal or anything like that, it doesn't hold the weight that most fans think it does. It just doesn't matter to most of these players. But there are exceptions to that statement, and I think that Port and Swanson is one of those exceptions. Is Port going to come to BYU simply because Ryner Swanson is there? No. But it checks a big box for him, and so long as BYU is able to check the rest of the boxes on their own, then I think that they are in the pole position to land Weston Port. And Ryner Swanson certainly helps BYU's case. He's also friends with a lot of other recruits, and he's a big name on the recruiting cycle this year. He could be the spark that starts a fire and some momentum for BYU's recruiting over the next couple of weeks. So that's a big deal. Another guy, as we go through our punch list of things that I want to talk about today on the recruiting trail, Adney Reid. Reid has been committed to BYU for a long time. We've kind of forgotten about Adney Reid. When he committed to BYU, he was listed at 6'3" and about 185 pounds. He was on an official visit a couple of weekends ago with Maealiuaki Smith. And Adney Reid is up to 6'5", 215, 220 pounds. He's elite. I talked to one of my sources who is one of the most connected people that I know, and he said, Jeff, I promise you that barring injury, Adney Reid is Sunday good. He's a special player and somebody that we need to pay a lot more attention to. If he has that size, he could be an elite pass rusher. Like, he's clearly growing, and that's exciting. He's been small enough that he's played linebacker and even some in the secondary throughout his high school career. Why do we care about that? Because that's what his background is. He's going to be able to play in coverage and give Jay Hill a lot of multiplicity within the defense because of how versatile he is. At 6'5", 220 pounds and still growing, Adney Reid looks like the kind of player that people hoped Logan Fano would be before he transferred from BYU. He's the kind of player that people thought that maybe Tyler Batty would eventually become, right? And Tyler Batty's gotten bigger, and he's poised to do great things as a pass rusher this year, but we haven't quite seen it from Batty yet. That's the potential that Adney Reid has, and that's a really big deal for BYU. Probably should be paying more attention to Adney Reid. Now let's talk quarterbacks. EJ Kamenang is a quarterback who had been committed to Washington, that he decommitted from Washington last week. He was set to come to BYU on an official visit, but he canceled that official visit. This is where we peel back the curtain of recruiting and talk about this a little bit more. Recruiting is never one side. There's never one side to a story. There are always two. And Kamenang canceling his visit, let's start to think about what that means. The immediate reaction is going to be, oh my gosh, does BYU have Maealiuaki Smith in the back? I don't think so. Maybe they do. I certainly don't think they're out of it. And I love BYU's position right now, but I don't think that Kamenang backing off of his BYU official visit was a one-sided decision. I think that was a mutual decision. And I think it says more about BYU's options at quarterback. I mentioned a few videos ago a quarterback who was coming to BYU, but I kept his name out of the video. He won the MVP at the quarterback camp this past week, and now Roman Gagliano is a name that we could talk about out in the open. He's an LDS quarterback out of the state of Alabama. He's got a handful of G5 offers so far. He's hearing from SEC schools. He took a visit to Penn State just last week. Of course, he came out and visited BYU a few days ago. Gagliano can play. When you watch his tape, there's a lot of Jaron Hall in the way that he extends plays, the way that he can move the ball downfield, and his sheer athleticism and ability to tuck and run and make a big play out of nothing. Gagliano's a really good player. I think that Kamenang not coming to BYU and that visit kind of, I guess that relationship kind of having a breakup on the surface, BYU and Kamenang, I think that says more about the emergence of Gagliano than it does about Maealiuaki Smith being committed to BYU. I think BYU has found a very solid second option that they would love to have if they don't get Smith. But clearly, they still want Smith, who's on an official visit to Oklahoma State as we record. After his visit is over, it's decision time. Sometimes that means the next day. Sometimes that means he wants to take a couple of weeks and decompress, and we may not hear from Maealiuaki Smith for 3 or 4 weeks. I don't know when he wants to commit, but from everything we've been told, he's done with visits after the Oklahoma State visit, and then he starts to sort through options. I love where BYU is at. Official visits are crazy. Going into his visit in Stillwater, I would have said that BYU is the runaway favorite. I think BYU still is in the lead in the clubhouse, but crazy things can happen on officials, and who knows what Mike Gundy and that coaching staff could have rolled out and impressed Smith with that would have changed his mind entirely. That's why these kids go on visits. So we'll see what happens with Smith. Kamenang is not coming. Roman Gagliano is a name you should start paying attention to. There's a lot of BYU ties there, and he can really play. BYU's got some really good options at quarterback. And this is what they get to do. This is the roster management that they get to figure out. It's a heck of a lot of fun to follow and to pay attention to and try to piece all of this puzzle together. That's what we're here at the Daily Dose to do, to help you piece that puzzle together. So, fun time for BYU recruiting. Hopefully, Ryner Swanson is the spark that starts some momentum over the next few weeks. And hopefully we see some action on the quarterback front for BYU. Thank you again for your support of the channel so far. And until next time, give them hell.